I share a birthday with one of my boys, and a few days ago we went on a birthday trip together to Disneyland. While we were there, I took a time lapse that I've wanted to do for a long time, but the stabilization didn't work super well. I thought I could just throw warp stabilizer on it and it would come out great, and that didn't happen, which means now I have to go in and do some extra stabilization in After Effects, and I thought I'd share with you how I do that. So normally when doing a time lapse, what I do is take all the photos, stitch them together in Premiere, throw warp stabilizer on it, do a little tweaking, and it usually works out pretty well. However, depending on the nature of the footage, sometimes that stabilization doesn't really work, and you have to go into After Effects to do some extra stabilization work. That's the case for me today, and I'm going to show you how I do that. So here are the photos that I took. I took 82 photos. And it's of the famous Walton Mickey statue in the center of the park. So while the park was closing and not too busy, my son generously sat down and waited for me to do this, and I walked around this courtyard taking photos of the statue. And I did the best I could to keep them stable. It was a little tricky because I didn't really know what point to stabilize on because it's an asymmetrical statue. So I wound up kind of centering on Walt's neck, as strange as that sounds, but that gave me a consistent reference point I could use throughout. However, that meant the base of the statue wasn't quite stable as I went through it. And so it kind of swings around. It's a little more on the left and then it's a little more on the right. And you can see I wasn't perfectly steady while taking these shots. It kind of moves up and down. So obviously there's some stabilization needed here. Now the problem I had was when I brought this into Adobe Premiere, well, you know what? It's probably easier to just show you. So I'm going to take a photo, drop it over here on the timeline, and I've already set the default Premiere settings to insert still photos at 1 frame per photo. So it will drop them in and kind of already have them at a single frame. So now I'm going to take this and drop the remainder of these photos in and pray that it does them in order. So now we have all of our photos in a Premiere timeline. I'm going to select all of them and nest them. And that just gives us a clip to work with as if it were a normal video clip. So now I go back in here. So now I'm going to go back into Effects and drop the warp stabilizer on there. Now, subspace warp is almost never the right answer, so I'm going to go to Position, Scale, and Rotation. So I click Preserve Scale, which basically means I don't want it zooming in and out trying to compensate. So I kept a pretty stable distance as I was going around the statue. I used the bricks in the courtyard as a reference. And so I feel like I don't need to zoom in and out of it. So it's just going to use the positioning and the rotation to correct the stabilization. I'm also going to set the smoothness to 75% because ideally I'd like it to be pretty smooth. And I'm going to leave this at Stabilize, Crop, and Auto Scale. And now we wait. It can seem annoying that Warp Stabilizer takes so long to process, but it's actually relatively fast compared to other methods of stabilization. So I try not to complain too much when it actually does work, and when it doesn't work, I just grit my teeth and figure out what to do next. So right away, you can kind of see the problem. Warp Stabilizer has gone and done its thing, but as a result, the statue's now crooked. So it's a little bit wacky. Now, if I try to run this right now, it's going to be really chuggy because the resolution is so high. So I'm going to pre-render this sequence and then show you what the result looks like. Okay, here's the result with Warp Stabilizer. It's just not quite great. Now, I don't think we're going to be able to get this footage perfect. This was a difficult situation, difficult lighting, difficult subject. So it's not going to be perfect, but I think we can do better than this. So I'm going to go into Adobe After Effects and show you how to do this manually. Okay, we've got a new project in After Effects, so I'm going to hit Command-I for import. And then we are going to select all these files. We will check Create Composition and check Import or JPEG Sequence. Now you may have some different options here depending on whether you're using RAW files or JPEGs. I pulled these into Lightroom first and did some exposure and color corrections and then just exported them as JPEGs, which I figured would be a little faster to work with. So, but depending on what you're using, you may have some different options in this dialog box. Now once we're done, we have a little clip that has our raw time lapse in here, unstabilized. You can see it's a little slow, but there it is. Now we're going to use the Stabilized Motion feature to manually correct this footage and get it where we want to be stabilization-wise. To do that, you want to open the Tracker panel, which you can find under Window, Tracker. That'll open right over here. Select the clip, and then we're going to hit Stabilize Motion. And you can see it jumps in and gives us a single track point that we can use for stabilization. Now, I actually want to do a couple of different things here, so I'm going to choose rotation as well. I mentioned before we don't need to do scale because I was at the correct distance from the statue throughout the hyperlapse. Now when I check rotation, it adds a second track point. Basically what it's going to do is use both track points to tell how the image is rotating around and then correct for that in the motion. So what I'm going to do is take this and actually expand it a little bit, just so we have a little more room to work with. And I'll do the same with the second point. And we need to find somewhere on the image that we can put these. So I'm going to fit it here and grab this and move it down, and I'm going to move that down to the base of the statue, which is what I want to correct on. So probably more up here. So this ring here around the base is pretty stable throughout the clip. So I'm going to use that as the reference point as it's moving around. I can't really use anything up on the statue itself because it's rotating. So it's constantly moving and shifting. Walt's on one side, then he's on the other. So we can't really stabilize on that too much. So I'm going to put it down on the base. If we stabilize on the base, that should give us a much better result. I'll take the second track point and similarly take it down to the base of the statue and find that first lip where it protrudes. And I'm just going to put the X right there. So this is basically the setup we're going to use for each of these frames. We've got a track point here on the left and then an accompanying track point here on the right. Over here you'll see this line that says Analyze. Now what this lets you do is move forward a frame at a time. It'll make its best guess about where the point should be and it'll automatically put it there, and then you can manually correct it and put it in the right place. In this case, because I have a lot of crazy lighting going on and because I'm spinning around the subject 360, it's not going to do a good job trying to find that exact placement. Sometimes it might get lucky, but I'm really going to have to do it frame by frame through it and correct each one. Now, if you want to, and depending on the footage, you can hit this button here. This will automatically analyze forward to the end of the clip, and it'll just chunk through each frame, finding the right place and putting it there. If you have very stable footage where that can work, that's great, and that can be the most efficient way to do it. In this case though, I tried it, it does not work. I'm gonna have to do this frame by frame. So I'm gonna hit analyze one frame forward, and I can already see that it is off. I'm gonna expand this a little more just so I can see what's going on here. And let's see, this needs to be right here. And you can see the first track point was here, the second one is down here, so you can get an idea of how much it's moving around. And then I will do the same over here. I'm gonna put that right there, similar movement. I'm going to expand this just a little bit more. And let's try jumping ahead one more frame. Okay, this time this one took and it landed pretty much in the right place. I'm pretty happy with that. This one needs some adjustment. Okay, one more frame. This one looks pretty good. This one's close. One more frame. And this is basically what you do. You just go through frame by frame, correcting the points so it has a reference to be able to stabilize the image properly. When it's done, you hit Analyze and it'll automatically do its math and create keyframes for all of the adjustments that it needs to make for the footage throughout. And you end up with something that looks like this. Now let's take a look. That is a lot more stable than it was. It's not perfect, but it's pretty dang good, and I'm much happier with that. Now right now you can see the black edges on the side. That's because it's not auto cropping it or doing any of that, and that's fine. I'll take this footage into Premiere and then make the final adjustments in there. So now I've imported that After Effects project into Adobe Premiere, and with that clip I've then added Warp Stabilizer on top of that. So I put smooth motion, 75%, position, scale, and rotation. And what that's doing is just taking an extra layer of stabilization and adding it onto the now refined After Effects footage to try and smooth it out a little bit extra. Okay guys, it's time for the big reveal. I have rendered the file, and here's the final product. Hey, it's not perfect, but for a quick hyperlapse taken while running out of Disneyland before it closes, under difficult lighting conditions and a weird subject and spinning around at 360, I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. But that's how you can take a hyperlapse that looks like it may not work out and go in and do the manual adjustments to stabilize it and get it where you need it to be. I'm James Archer. I talk about film and photography, and if you like topics like this, go ahead and hit that subscribe button.